Who is this mystery construct? And could it help us solve the secret of the missing ancient Master Sword? One of the biggest questions so far about Age of Imprisonment has been the identity of the construct that we saw assembling at the end of the second trailer. We see the Zonai machine magically build itself, pieces of equipment connected by spiritual energy, and we're teased with notes from Vi's theme, hinting at the iconic and beloved spirit of the blade who we first met in Skyward Sword. Now, would it be cool to have Vi as some sort of automaton sword-slinging character, as some have suggested? Obviously, yes. Would it make a ton of sense? I'm still not so sure. In my last video, I speculated that this character was just a new, original Hyrule Warriors creation. A swordsman construct being used to fill the role that Link would ordinarily have in gameplay, since it seems unlikely that Link himself will appear in this game. However, in regards to Vi's theme playing, my initial thought was this character couldn't be Vi. Because if we go off what we know of the canon events of Tears of the Kingdom's past, the Master Sword technically couldn't have been involved in the Imprisoning War. As we know in the game, the Master Sword from the future is sent to the past after Ganondorf has already been sealed, and only then does Zelda take it on a 50,000-year joyride to heal it, grow its power, and eventually eliminate Ganon. And because Zelda only receives the sword after the Imprisoning War is already over, I assumed that there was no way for the Master Sword to have been involved in the conflict. But then, a lot of you in the comments reminded me of something important. You guys rightly pointed out that there would have been another Master Sword in the time of the Zonai. Or rather, it's the same sword, just in the past. I didn't consider it, because, to be fair, it's not mentioned at all in Tears of the Kingdom. But it is true that from the point that Zelda receives the Decayed Sword from her era, there would have been two versions of the swords coexisting. The unseen one native to the Zonai era, and the one Link sent from the future. And it means that before Zelda receives Future Sword, she theoretically could have had access to the past Master Sword, or Pastor Sword, and used it against Ganon. So while I still am not convinced that this character is Vi, it's not as impossible as I originally thought. Being reminded that there was a sword in the past made me realize there are a lot of questions and potential plot holes surrounding the existence of that sword. In this video, I want to dig into those questions, and really play out what it would mean for the Master Sword to appear in Age of Imprisonment. So let's get into it with my biggest question. Since there was a sword in the past, why wouldn't they just use it to end the Imprisoning War? My first thought is that by the time they would have known to use the sword on Ganondorf, it would have been too late. Zelda doesn't reveal her knowledge of his weakness to the sword until well after he'd become the Demon King. And at that point, Ganondorf's power, enhanced by the Secret Stones, may have just been too strong. There's a good chance that the Master Sword of that time, if it was at a comparable strength level to the one in the opening scene, wouldn't have been powerful enough to do anything. The one in the future had recently been restored to its full base power, according to the Deku Tree. Despite that, it got shattered almost immediately, and that was after Ganon had been sealed for millennia. So I can't imagine that the sword from the past would do much against him when he's freshly imbued with the power. When Zelda shows Mineru the decayed future sword, Mineru mentions that it could take centuries of the sword being provided with sacred power to be strong enough to defeat the Demon King. And that's even after he'd already been sealed. So maybe that would have applied to the version in the past. But then again, even in its decayed state, when a bit of the sword broke off and hit Ganon, it did manage to damage him. And now I'm wondering, why didn't they just go down to the imprisoning chamber and try stabbing the sealed Ganon with the decayed sword? And especially if they had access to the Pastor Sword, which would probably be in better condition, why wouldn't they try that? It's probably just a plot hole because narratively, that's simply not an exciting end for our big bad. But assuming it's not, maybe the people of the Zonai era didn't know about the Pastor Sword or where it was. Theoretically, the Master Sword has always existed in Hyrule, but it's not used in every game. So it's possible that the knowledge of the sword had been lost at that time. From the few mentions of the sword we do see in the cutscenes of the past, it does seem like their knowledge of the sword is limited. Like when Rauru mentions that Link in the future would be the final line of defense, he says, "We rely on your knight and that legendary sword he carries." At this point, we don't know if Zelda told him about the sword's power or if he's familiar with the Master Sword's legend already. But later, when he's sealing Ganon, he says, "Years from now, someone will appear with the sword that seals the darkness. A swordsman with the power to defeat you." To me, his lines read as if he's treating the sword as something that doesn't exist yet. And even Mineru, who seems to be the most knowledgeable character of the era, also seems surprised by the abilities of the Master Sword when Zelda brings her the decayed sword and reveals that Ganondorf was vulnerable to it. So while we know that the sword exists back then, is it possible that the Zonai didn't? I guess so, but that still feels odd to me, since the Hyrule of the future is well aware of the sword's history and power. So, okay, let's put that aside and assume that they do know about the sword. Why then would they not suggest using it? The only logical next step to me in that train of thought would be that only the Link/hero of each era can wield the sword. And maybe they didn't have a hero at the time? Which brings us back to this mystery construct. So, okay, let's play out the idea that this character is related to Fi and the Master Sword. If we explore that last scenario, where we're posing the question, why didn't they use the ancient Master Sword against Ganon, and the answer being that they knew about it, had access to it, but had no one to wield it, I would then guess that this new construct character is meant to be someone who is able to wield the Master Sword. And if we operate under the assumption that only a Link can use the sword, then we have to assume that it's some sort of spirit vessel for a Link. Back in the day, I'd theorized that Mineru was developing technology to store spirits and host them in constructs. So maybe they somehow preserved a hero spirit, and now they're activating it. We may have a clue pointing towards this with the Ancient Heroes aspect. There are a lot of unexplained mysteries surrounding this item, but in its description, it says, "This item is said to contain the spirit of a hero who once saved Hyrule. That hero's aura will envelop the wearer." That description aligns pretty closely with the idea that Mineru has the ability to capture and transfer the spirit of a hero into a construct. And based on its beam up set bonus, it does have a relationship to the Master Sword. The in-game explanation of the hero's aspect implies that it's meant to be the hero of the ancient calamity seen in Impa's tapestry. I've always been a bit skeptical of that, because I felt like just because the aspect looks like this depiction of the hero, it doesn't mean that it literally was him. It could just be a recurring outfit for heroes, similar to the green outfit that most Links wear. But I'm mainly skeptical because the Ancient Heroes aspect is so clearly tied to Zonai culture, which feels messy because they come from an era far before the Ancient Calamity. And while it appears to be a separate species, the armor it wears matches the standard look of the Zonai, incorporating the iconography of the boar, dragon, and owl designs. The construct we see here has similarities, but you could argue that those are just the typical Zonai motifs. It's so hard to tell from the limited footage we had, but it would be interesting if they managed to incorporate elements of the hero's aspect into this design. The Ancient Heroes aspect definitely has a lot of unknowns, which would make it an interesting element for Age of Imprisonment to explore. Alright, that was a bit of a tangent, so let's get back to really stepping out what this would look like in Age of Imprisonment. In the midst of the conflict, Zelda would need to reveal that there's a blade in the future that could seal Ganondorf away. Maybe Rauru would say, "Oh wait, that's right, we have one of those." Then they'd go on a quest to locate the sword. But upon finding it, they'd realize they don't have the ability to wield it, since there's no Link or hero in that era. So then maybe Mineru would tell a story about a legendary hero from the past who wielded the blade, and reveals that, somehow, they have access to the hero spirit. And that, wow, I have this new technology to insert the spirit into this construct. And then we'd have this Link-adjacent swordsman character who can use the Master Sword of the past. That would explain the Link-like build of this construct. And I think Fi's theme could simply be a nod to that swordsman spirit. Although, as a sidebar, my other tinfoil theory when I was brainstorming was that maybe Mineru's idea is we have this magical sword, but no one to wield it. But maybe we extract the spirit from the sword and have her wield herself for once. That one is a stretch, but it was mostly me trying to find the Fi tie-in. Of the two ideas, I think a Link-type spirit feels more likely to be in this construct. But either way, after stepping this theory out, I just still feel like there are so many issues with adding a Master Sword wielder into the story. Firstly, even if they go through all that effort of spiritual extraction and implantation, we know that it ultimately does not work. Ganondorf does not fall to the sword of that time, and we obviously never saw this character in the final battle or ever even mentioned. Maybe it turns out that the past sword, like the future sword, is just too weak to beat Ganon without a major dragon power-up. So going through all that effort would just seem like a waste of time. Bringing the Pastor Sword into the mix also just does not work in the grand scheme of the story, and I feel like its presence would be incongruous with cutscenes we've already seen. Like Rauru declaring that Link and his sword in the future are the last line of defense. Or Mineru not recognizing the Master Sword, and instead suggesting the only solution is to charge it with sacred power for a few centuries. The sword was only ever mentioned as a solution for Ganon's future return, never as an option in the past. And maybe that's a plot hole, but if it is, I think it's one they'll need to work around. Because ultimately, if they had a functional sword and vessel back then, wouldn't it sort of invalidate Zelda's whole point in the story and undercut her sacrifice of returning the decayed sword back to the future? So while the construct could, in theory, answer the question of the missing Master Sword in the past, I worry that the answer won't be very satisfying. At the end of the day, I still suspect that the presence of this construct is a gameplay-driven decision, a way for Koei Tecmo to give players a swordsman option when Link himself isn't available. And I honestly don't think it needs to get much deeper than that. Like in Age of Calamity, we had Teriko, who was a fun play on the guardians we faced as enemies in Breath of the Wild. I could potentially see this character being a similar twist on the soldier construct. After really thinking about it, I'm still of the mindset that this will be an original character that doesn't impact the story too deeply. Because if we believe what they've said, that this game is canonical to the events of Tears of the Kingdom, the presence of a Master Sword wielder in the past just feels like it would change too much of Zelda's story. I could be totally wrong though. They did play Fi's song, and it feels a little irresponsible if they did that for no reason. And we know that Zelda and Fi have some connection and are able to communicate. Perhaps that's a power that transcends time. And maybe there's a way they can sneak this Pastor Sword wielder into the story in a way I haven't considered. Or maybe I'm putting too much faith in them respecting the canon to the letter. I'm certainly open to being surprised, because, like I said, I think it would be fun. And fun is the thing that Hyrule Warriors games do best. So, what do you think? Is this character a vessel for a lost hero's spirit? Fi wielding herself for once? Or just Koei Tecmo filling the Link-shaped gameplay gap? Feel free to share any thoughts or theories you have in the comments. And, as always, thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.